Welcome back to Year of the Wager. I am Two Commas, and today we're going to be doing an instructional video on how to play Badugi. Yes, it's a triple draw game that is often found in the mix, and I get some questions about how to play it and what are some of the strategies behind it. It's one of my favorite games. I've done quite well in it, and so we're going to be giving you those tips today so that you can become a successful Badugi player. So, first of all, what is Badugi and why is it unique? Well, the first thing to know is it's one of the games that you'll find in the poker mix that is actually not poker, because poker is a 5-card game and Badugi is a 4-card game. So that's one of the first things that you're going to notice when you're playing Badugi is that you're only dealt 4 cards if you're playing Badugi straight up, which is what we're going to be talking about today. In future videos, we'll talk about how to play it as part of a split pot mixed game like Badesi or Badusi. But for today, we're going to be just talking about how to play regular old Badugi. So what do you need to know? What are the rules so that you can understand how to play this game? The first thing you need to know is, what is a Badugi? Well, a Badugi means you have 4 different suits in your hand. So you have to have at least a club, a heart, a diamond, and a spade, and you cannot have any pairs in your hand. So that is critical. Sometimes people see that they have a diamond, a club, a heart, and a spade, but they have 2 of the same numerical value, and that disqualifies you from having a Badugi. So a Badugi is any 4 cards that are not paired that are of different suits. If you have that, you have a Badugi. The nuts in Badugi is ace 2 3 4. So it's a low ball game and you're always trying to get the lowest cards of various suits in your hand. So this is what makes Badugi different from some of the other games, that you have less cards and you are actually trying to make sure that you don't have the same suit in your hand. One thing that's also different about Badugi is, unlike deuce to 7 or ace to 5, where you're often going to have to improve your hand unless you were dealt a monster, with Badugi you don't necessarily have to improve in order to still win the pot. So that's a key difference when playing Badugi, and it means that your starting hand selection is that much more critical. So keep that in mind when you start to play the game yourself, and when you're trying to actually get better at it, that your starting hand selection is even more critical, I think, than in some of the other draw games like deuce to 7 and ace to 5. Badugi is normally played 6-handed, although you can play a little bit more or a little bit less, but it is normally a 6-handed game. And in a normal Badugi game, it is triple draw and limit. So you are going to be betting in fixed limit. So if you're playing a 20-40 game or an 80-160 game, then on your first draw, and on the card you're dealt, you're going to be betting the first denomination of $20. And then on your second and third draws, you'll be betting $40 denominations. It is a triple draw game, which means you get 3 chances to improve your hand, and you can discard as many cards as you want. So in some games, there's a limit to how many cards you throw away. In Badugi, you can throw all 4 cards away. It has been done. It is often done during the course of a game, but you don't want to be doing that too often or you're not going to be a winning Badugi player. So the other thing to keep in mind when playing Badugi is you don't actually have to make a Badugi to win. You can have what's called a 3-card Badugi, a 2-card Badugi, and in theory, I guess a 1-card Badugi, although I don't know that I've ever seen that in real life. So what do I mean by that? So any 4-card Badugi wins, because that's the definition of a Badugi. So you have 4 different suits. But let's say you don't have 4 different suits. You only have 3 different suits. So let's say you have the ace of clubs, the 3 of hearts, and the 7 of diamonds. But then you also have the king of diamonds, right? So you've only got 3 different suits because the king and the 7 are both diamonds. Well, that's a 3-card Badugi. So you don't count the king. You just have the ace, the 3, the 7. And if you're playing against someone else who also doesn't have a Badugi, then you're going to see if they have a 3-card Badugi as well. And if they do, then what happens is the winner is the individual who has the best and lowest 3 cards of the Badugi suits. So if they have an ace, a 4, and an 8 of all different suits, they have an 8 3-card Badugi, and you have a 7 3-card Badugi, so you will win because your 7 is lower. You always start from the top and work your way down when determining the strength of your hand. So for the reason that you don't actually have to make a Badugi, then your starting cards are very important. So for instance, if you start with ace 2, 3 of different suits, ace of spades, deuce of diamond, 3 of hearts, you are actually a favorite to win even if you don't make the Badugi, because your ace 2, 3 is the lowest 3 cards you can have that's not a Badugi. And so if your opponents don't make a Badugi, and making a Badugi is very hard because you only have 13 of each suit in order to try and make it, so you need very specific cards to hit your hand. If your opponents don't make a Badugi, then you're going to win or at least chop the pot with an ace 2, 3. So starting with very low cards is critically important. And so that logic continues to even if you don't have 3 different suits in your hand. Let's just say you have 2 different suits in your hand. Let's say you have the ace of spades and the deuce of diamonds. Well, as long as no one else has 3 different suits in their hand or 4 different suits in their hand, then you would likely win that hand as well. So that's why it's important to start with different suits that are low cards when you're playing Badugi, and you're going to greatly increase your chance of winning. So that's the basic rules of Badugi. Now let's talk a little bit about strategy. Just like in all poker games, it's position, position, position. Where you are in the hand matters, and being on the button is the best position you can have. And in triple draw games, it's even more important. And the reason why is because when you're playing something like Hold'em or Omaha, you get information as to whether or not someone has a strong hand based on whether they bet or their reactions or facial expressions or something like that. But you get more information in a triple draw game, and that's because you get to see how many cards your opponent discards. If they stay pat, meaning they're not going to take any additional cards, then they have a very strong hand. There's no way to bluff. Well, there is a way to bluff. It's called snowing, and we'll talk about that. But they are representing a very strong hand if they stay pat, okay? And you get to see that if you're in position to determine whether or not you should draw a card. And we'll talk about when's the best time to snow or to bluff. Position is critically important in Badugi, so your opening ranges will greatly increase the better the position you have. So you want to be in late position when you're making decisions around your starting hands. So your second strategy tip is that your starting cards really matter. Now, I've said that before, but that's because it's very important. So it's going to be determined by the position you're in to how wide of an opening range you can have. If you're in early position, I suggest you have at least 3 cards that are of different suits and below a 7. That is my opinion. That's how I would approach it. A lot of times when people play fixed limit games, especially triple draw games, they call that additional bet because they're like, oh, it's just one more bet to potentially make my hand. But those one more bets add up, and that's the difference between winning and losing players. Like, you have to know when to call an additional bet and when not to call an additional bet, when you're behind, when you're ahead. If you start with bad cards, you're going to find yourself drawing dead and in hot water most of the time. So your starting cards really matter. If you're in early position, again, 3 cards of different suits below a 7 or 7 and below is what's most important. In later position, you can actually go with just 2 cards that are in the wheel is what I would suggest. So if you got an ace deuce or ace 3, ace 4, I would raise in position playing Badugi. The third tip is to aim for a 7. A lot of people aim for 8s or 9s. 8s are okay. I would definitely not aim for a 9. So make sure you're aiming as low as possible when you're playing Badugi because you're going to get one notched a lot of time. You're going to make a 8 Badugi and someone else is going to have a 7 Badugi. You're going to make a 8 Badugi, someone else is going to have a 6 Badugi. You don't want to be getting just notched out because you were aiming for cards that were too high and not likely to win the pot. Again, ace deuce and ace 2-3 of different suits are super strong starting hands. So if you happen to be lucky enough to be dealt those, raise and re-raise so that you can get your opponents out of the pot. You don't want them drawing and potentially making a better Badugi than you. Once I had ace 2-3 in the very first Badugi tournament at the World Series of Poker. On the last draw, I just knew I was golden because we were both drawing one and I had ace 2-3. I actually ended up making a jack Badugi, but my opponent made a 10 Badugi and I got knocked out of the World Series of Poker Badugi tournament. But in general, ace 2-3 is going to get you there more often than not. Now, there is an important concept to understand in Badugi, and that's called snowing. I'm not exactly sure why they call it snowing in Badugi when it's basically bluffing, but in triple draw games, they call it snowing. There are going to be times when you want to do it. Typically, you're going to want to do it in position. So you get to see if your opponent is drawing cards or not, and you're going to want to set it up pretty much from the beginning. What do I mean by that? So Badugi and other triple draw games are hands of card removal. So if you have been dealt ace, ace, 2-3 with 3 diamonds in your hand, then you know that at least 2 aces are gone and 3 diamonds are gone. These are cards that your opponent are probably going to need. And I actually wouldn't suggest snowing with those cards because those are actually good cards that can win you the pot. But let's say that you have maybe middle of the road cards. So you have maybe you've got 2 aces, but you also have maybe 7-8 so you got 3 diamonds in your hand. You've got 2 aces with 3 diamonds in your hand and a 7-8. Well, those are cards that your opponent likely needs. Well, after the first draw, let's say you get another 6 and another ace. Well, now you've got great card removal because you know your opponents are likely looking for those cards. And, it's an opportunity for you to start thinking about, do you want to stay pat if your opponent is still drawing cards and represent that you've already made your hand? You should do it at a fairly decent rate. If you're in position, you're going to get called sometime, but if you're not getting called and your bluffs are being exposed, you're not bluffing enough, right? Sometimes you'll want to understand that if you've got a lot of the cards that you think your opponent might need, going through your hand and you know that they're not going to get those cards, it's maybe a good time to stand pat even if you haven't made your hand and, bet on the river. And oftentimes you'll get a fold because they'll just assume you've already made a Badugi. So let's talk about some actual hand examples. So let's say that you are dealt ace of diamonds, 3 of hearts, 9 of spades, king of spades. Again, I wouldn't recommend necessarily aiming for a 9, but, some people would. So let's say you keep the ace, the 3, and the 9, and you throw away the king. And on your first draw, let's say you make a 4 of spades. Well, what just happened is, although you already had a spade in your hand with your 9, you can actually you actually improved your hand because now you have an ace of diamonds, a 3 of hearts, and a 4 of spades, and so you can throw away the 9. So Badugi is a game where you can improve your suit and actually get better, although you had originally decided to keep the 9. On your second draw, let's say you get the 10 of hearts. So now you've got ace of diamonds, 3 of hearts, 4 of spades, 10 of hearts. You still don't have a Badugi, but you do have a strong 3-card Badugi. And you're either going to throw the card, the 10 away, and let's say you get the 7 of clubs. So now you actually have a Badugi, ace of diamonds, 3 of hearts, 4 of spades, 7 of clubs. That's a very strong hand and likely to win. Or maybe you blanked and got a king of hearts, right? So now you still don't have a Badugi, but you still have ace, 3, 4 of 3 different suits, and you could likely win with just those 3 cards. So that's an example of how you can improve your hand and or win with the 3 card. So now let's talk about an example of snowing. So let's say you're dealt 2, 4, 10, jack, all spades. Now, in most examples, you just want to throw this hand away. You don't actually want to be in the pot. But let's say for some reason you're in the big blind or you're on the button, it's not raised or something of that, and somehow you find yourself in the pot. So you know that 4 spades have come your way. You could start to set up the snow right away by actually just throwing away 2 cards, or you can go ahead and throw away 3 cards. So let's assume that you throw away 3 cards and you only keep the deuce of spades. And let's say now you get the 6 of spades, the 8 of spades, and the king of diamonds. That's still a terrible hand. But what you know now is that 6 of the 13 spades you've seen and your opponents won't get them. This is an ideal candidate to set up a bluff or a snow. And so on the second draw, I would just throw 1 card away, okay? And it really doesn't matter, but assume you're going to throw away the king of diamonds. So you keep the 2 of spades, the 6 of spades, and the 8 of spades. You know you don't have a Badugi, but that doesn't matter because when you get the next card, if you're in position and your opponents are still drawing, which they probably still are drawing, you're going to stay pat and you're going to bet the second draw and you're also going to bet the third draw with the assumption that your opponents are not going to get the critical spade that they need. Likely, this is going to work if they don't have a spade in their hand, and they'll fold because they won't make a Badugi and they're going to assume that you did based on the way that you played. So that's an example of a good time to set up a snow. So that's how you play Badugi. Again, it's a really fun game to play. If you've never played it, give it a shot. It's normally played in the mixed games, and it's also normally a part of split pot games like, again, Badusi and Badacy. And you're not sharing community cards, so it just gives you a rush that I think a lot of people enjoy a little bit better than Hold'em in some instances. Now, you're not going to be playing for no limit amounts, but you can be playing in a $200, $400 limit game or something like that, and those pots can get very hefty if that's your style. So hopefully you learned something. If you got any comments, please leave them down below. Again, Badugi is one of my favorite games. I want to see more people playing mixed games. And in a future session, we will talk about Badusi, Badacy. We'll also talk about Ace to 5, Deuce to 7, and some of the other games that you find in the mix. Hopefully this was informative to you though. If it was, please do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell, do all of those things, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks.